and Governor. Thank you very much for your time today, and look forward to discussing your background and what made you such a great leader. So, your early childhood, you were born in Kansas and then moved to Holly.
Yes, I was born in Friend, Kansas, about 17, 18 people in the town. It's north of Garden City, a little ways. And I moved to Holly at age 6 months, but my home was in Friend, Kansas. A couple of weeks ago, I went back to that place to see what it looked like. It was very interesting because I was the youngest of 5 children. And it was 1928, which was not a good year to be born in, but that's the beginning.
Sure, the beginning of the Depression. It probably had a huge impact on your life.
We moved to Holly, Colorado then, and when I was 6 months of age. And I was raised in Holly through high school, and it was a very good life, but it was an interesting life. It was during the Depression in the 30s, during the Dust Bowl. We were kind of in the middle of the Dust Bowl, and it was in a very small town, 800 people, and that's where most of my character developed.
Absolutely. There was many SIGUPs that, believe it or not, have come from Colorado. Again, it came from there. Woolhite, I believe, was about your area. Yes. So it had to be a very good place to come from.
But the memories I have, I was never hungry, but I worked very hard, and we led a very low-cost life, and I learned an awful lot during those years, and I'd like to share that.
Absolutely. So what was kind of the biggest impact from there that maybe from Holly? I mean, it was the good work.
Well, I picked up the ethic of rural frontier Colorado, and my mother was a very spectacular woman, and my father was also a very good person, but it was my mother who was the one who was most aggressive in saying, this is how you ought to be as a human being. I learned to work hard. And I did things I ran an elevator at age 14. It was very unusual. Secondly, I learned to be honest. In a small town, you deal honestly with people. So hard work, honesty, sharing. You never ate a meal in front of a hungry person. You shared the meal. You know, that was what the frontier Methodist ethic was. And my mother daily pounded those things in. For example, we had 5 children. I was the youngest. We would go swimming in our car we didn't have a pool. We had a kind of a lake we swam in. But every time she did that, she stopped and got a couple of neighbor kids to take with us. Why? Because they didn't have a way to go swimming, and we ought to share our swimming with them. It was daily repetition of acts of hard work, being honest, and sharing with your neighbor. And that was really beat into me as a young kid.
No, I think that's great. Because Walter Scott, when he addressed CSU, he addressed some of those exact same things. So I think that's some great parallels, because you both have accomplished so much.
Yes.
Absolutely. So he was like, find a good mentor, personal integrity, people skills are more important than IQ, and to share what you have reaped.
Yeah.
So I like that. What made you decide to go to CSU or Colorado A&M at the time?
One of the other things about a small town is you're at the end of the string. In football, I played football. There's AAA, double A. We were 8-man football. I mean, we couldn't get 11 on the field. We finally did. But so when you are from a small town, you really feel the elitism of cities. And I, therefore, when I went to college, was trying to find a place I fit in. I knew how to square dance, but I didn't know how to social dance. So Aggies is the place you go. it was a big thing to go to a place where you would be accepted. And as a small town guy, all you remember is losing football games 58-0, you know, because the other towns are bigger and better. So when I went away to college, I went to an ag school, Colorado State University now, but it was Colorado A&M then. It had 3,000 students. This was 1946. And I went there because I thought I could get in and get along better there being from the country.
Sure. Is that what kind of drew you to the SIGEP fraternity?
I don't know. I can't remember what got me to the SIGEP. But I was going to college. This is very new to me. And I had a chance to join this group of guys who lived in this house. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So it was accidental, probably, that I joined that. But it was a household in which half of them were young guys like me coming right out of high school. The other half were vets who were aged 25, 23, who were coming out of the war. And it was in 1946. And so it was a mixture.
It had to be an incredible time. I mean, that kind of even really a small explosion for the university with so many students now coming back.
Yes.
And you met your wife there, Lee.
Yes. Let me talk about some of the members of that fraternity. Would you help me with names?
Sure.
You know a bunch of them.
Oh, absolutely. Ken Monfort.
Yes. Ken Monfort and I became very good friends. We were like roommates. We were in the same house, the same floor. And after my freshman year, he and I went to Europe together, biked for 3 months, which was a very interesting experience. And I loved that guy. He was a great friend.
Because you actually went to find his brother Richard's gravesite?
One of the things we did was we visited his brother's gravesite. And he had been killed in World War II. And Kenny was just a very interesting human being, very good human being. And I was very young. I was trying to learn what the world was like. And the whole gathering of that fraternity, I was not a heavy drinker. I was not a guy who spent a lot of time partying. I was a more sober end of things. So I got assigned to be the caretaker of some guys who did drink a great deal. And we had a very good experience. I enjoyed that group of guys, and we had some very interesting things. I, as a freshman, went with a group from the fraternity down to CU and painted their cannon green and gold. It was in my car. I drove my car down there, and I was the only guy caught. They got my license plate. Now, I was put on disciplinary probation for the full 4 years of my college experience over that. Back on the question about how did I meet my wife, this is a very interesting story, I got to tell you. I was college president, student body president. Homecoming queen was something we elected. It was a big deal. And so there was a committee of 3 that counted the votes. They were to bring me the results during the halftime of the game, and I was to go crown the queen. So I was sitting in the stands. A boy, one of the 3, came over and brought me the results and says, "Here's the queen." So I went down and crowned the queen, came back and sat in the stands. Another person in the committee came running up to me afterwards and said, "Romer, you crowned the wrong queen." I said, "How many people know?" He said, "The 3 of us who counted votes and you." And I said, "That egg has been fried." I sat on that story. We had crowned the wrong queen. The person had just switched names in his memory as he ran up the stadium steps. Well, the person who really won was my wife. I didn't know her at that time. Later, I began to date her, and later I married. And we had 2 children before I told her about this story, that she really was the homecoming queen but never got the recognition. And I got to tell you, if you make that kind of mistake, bury it.
Absolutely. That's a great story, though. But as a student, one of the things too, even though you were on probation, it didn't stop you. You accomplished so much as an undergraduate.
Well, one of the questions I know you have in your mind is role models. Harris Gard was a math professor. He was the student advisor to student government. And he was really very important to me. He taught me math, but also he taught me how to function as a student leader. And one of the things that I need to describe to you, do you have a piece of paper, blank
Sure.
piece of paper? I can draw
Absolutely.
something on the back.
Sure.
Just give me a blank piece of paper. When I went to when I ran for student body president, I always had this chart in my mind. This is ego, and this is the job that you're doing. When I ran for student body president, 90% of my motivation, I think, was ego, trying to prove that I was somebody. I was from the country, and I just was in a group of high-flying guys older than me, and I had to prove that I was worth something. So I did things with a lot of ego behind it. As I proceeded through my political career, I did things not because of ego, but because of the importance of the job. And so it was a very interesting thing for me to recognize that I was interested in representing people and helping them, but the agenda of student body president is not a heavy agenda. It's about celebrations and all that jazz. It wasn't about making the world better or helping people live better in it. But later in life, I had much less ego driving me, very much more of the importance of the job.
The empathy of the world.
That was important for me to recognize.
I think it's what's made you such a great leader and a great person. The ability, as much as you've given back. But so you did find good benefit from being in the fraternity. I mean,
Yes, these were great human beings, and they taught me a lot. I was very immature, coming out of the country of a town of 800. I was not a sophisticated guy, and so I learned a lot about the world from them. And they were good human beings. They had a lot of fun. They did a lot of partying. And I was not that much of a guy into it, but I was their friend, and I learned a lot.
Because I imagine Dale Dodrill would be
What?
able to keep Dale Dodrill
Yes,
would be able to keep anybody in line.
he was a good friend. He was a good guy, and
Yeah, and Walter Scott too. I believe you were very close.
Yes.
To too.
yes.
Yes. So, what can you tell me about? Well, okay, because you had very good close relationships with Ken Monford and Walter Scott. You
Say it
remain
again?
You remain close with both Ken and Walter throughout your entire life.
Yes.
And we just recently lost Walter, which is quite sad.
Yeah.
We talked about finding his grave, because that actually led to the Colorado War Memorial. I believe they brought his body back, and that became part of.
Say
I
that
believe
again.
the Monfords had a big impact on the Colorado Memorial for World War II.
I think they did. My memory is not good on that one.
And so we talked. Did you have other role models even after you got out of school?
Yes, all my life I have paid a great deal of attention to the people I work with and learn from, and it's strange how you pick up those models, and they come from people who sometimes you don't expect it. And I just, all my life, I had an attitude that my knowledge was limited, my understanding was limited, and I had to learn from people who were more gifted than I, Therefore, I was always listening, open to listen to people who disagreed with me. And I'd say, what's your evidence? I would listen to it, think about it, and sometimes I would reject it and say, no, you're wrong. Other times I'd say, hey, you're right. There were two big events in my life that I changed my view because I listened hard to people who were on the other side. One was the Vietnam War. I'll speak about that later. And the other was gayness. I didn't understand gay people. And I found I was wrong. And I learned from other people about those two issues. Therefore, I still daily live my life that I got to be open to new knowledge, new truth that somebody has and I don't have. And sometimes it's people who bitterly oppose you. You got to listen to them. They may be right.
Absolutely. So, what about that? What about the Vietnam War?
Well, let me go through another step before I get
Absolutely.
there. I left Aggies and went to law school at CU. There was a black man, one in law school. He didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a place to live. So we said, let's go rent a house. So we rented a little house on the edge of Boulder. We lived together. He was very left. I don't know if he was a member of the Communist Party, but he was a fellow traveler for sure. And I lived with him for a year. He was just a friend going to law school. Studied with him. 3 years later, he was killed. He was a black Muslim, and he got involved with the black Muslims and was killed within that group. But I later was an Air Force officer, and I continually was called in by boards saying, what are you doing living with a black communist? And it was because he was a friend. And I came from the country. I was open to experience different kinds of views and different kind of experiences. I tell that story because I think it's very important when you have prejudices to try to find out the truth about them and get rid of them.
No, that is an amazing.
Now, you asked a question about
the war.
What?
We were talking about the Vietnam War.
I was a IOTC guy. I served in the Air Force for 2 years. I was a prosecutor in Germany. I'd always had a great interest in history. I read a great deal about Vietnam. I'd followed the French history in Vietnam. And so when we got involved in Vietnam, I sensed that we were not being told the truth. I was out of the Air Force by that time. But I went to Vietnam personally as an individual because I wanted to learn about that war. It was in 1965. That's pretty early. And I spent some time in Vietnam, came back, and I was convinced that we shouldn't be in this war. The whole country felt otherwise. I had been active in democratic politics, and I had to drop out of democratic politics for 10 years because I didn't believe that we were doing the right thing internationally. And it's just a lesson that I'd share with people is that when you are in a job that you can no longer support, you ought to get out of it. And that's my story about Vietnam.
Sure, but then you also, so that was about 65, 68, because you were still then, you were in the...
I was in the Senate. I was in the House for 4 years, then I was in the State Senate for 4 years, and I ran for the U.S. Senate in 1966, lost that race, and that's after that I decided I needed to drop out because this country, I called him, I was one of the lead Democrats in Colorado. I called a meeting of the Democratic Party and said, let's establish a reference library on Vietnam that has both sides of the war. I was laughed out of the room by really good people. It was just the atmosphere that dominated. And I said, I can't be working in this thing. I'm going to quit. And I quit for 10 years. Now, I had another similar experience. I lived 10 miles from the Japanese relocation camp at Grenada, Colorado.
Okay.
And I knew that was wrong, but I couldn't do anything. I was a kid. I went up there to play football, and it was a very interesting thing, but not to take too much time on that. I just wanted to.
No, it's interesting because you see a lot of the parallelism today.
Yeah, and I just would advise anybody that's in public life, pay very detailed attention to the facts. Listen to people who disagree with you. And if they're right, accept that. Change your position. We need to learn from other people's truth.
Correct. We need to be able to recognize truth.
Yeah.
In today's world. And what ultimately inspired you to get into public service? Was there a specific event or?
I always had wanted to serve people, and I knew politics and government was important. And when I went to law school and was served in the Air Force, I wanted to come back and be in the legislature. So I took off a year and studied ethics at Yale before I did that, and that was very helpful to me. But I came back and I became a young lawyer and ran for the House from Denver and served 4 years. Served 4 years for the Senate, and then ran for the U.S. Senate, lost that race. Dropped out for 10 years. Came back when Governor Lamb called me up and said, be my ag secretary. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And then he asked me to be his chief of staff. Then he appointed me state treasurer, and I held that job for 10 years. Then I ran for governor, and I was governor 3 times. And that's a quick summary of my political career. The most, you ask sometimes what were the most important experiences I had. I had this conviction that my view of the truth was always partial. Therefore, I had to listen to others, see what evidence they had, and sort it out. So when I was governor, I didn't have a desk. I had a table. I always had people in around the table when we had a decision. About every half hour, we'd make decisions. And I insisted on them participating very vividly in the debate and giving me their opinion about how they would finally vote in the final issue. Then I would make my decision. And I wasn't dictated by it. Many times it was 9 on one side and me on one, but it was my responsibility to listen before I decided. And we had a very high focus on ethics. We did not allow anybody to be in our government and to lie about the issue or to their colleagues that they worked with or to us. And that was very important. If you ask, what did I do that was most important? The atmosphere of the office was one of the most important things we did. But in terms of public issues, Great Outdoors Colorado, which now gets $70 million a year for open space and parks and recreation. I created that with Ken Salazar. It was an idea. I didn't like the lottery, but since they had the lottery, I was going to take some of the money and do it in the right thing. So that may be the most important thing I did. My strong interest, though, was education all through life. I came from Holly, Colorado, and man, life was tough in Holly. The only way you got the chance to really be who you could be and to see the world as it is was to get educated. And so I knew I had the opportunity to do that, but I also knew there was a great number of people who didn't have that opportunity. Therefore, the late bloomer, the person who didn't have a chance, was always on my mind. When I was in the legislature, I helped create, it was my idea to create Metro State University because it was a school aimed at people who were working and needed education and they could go back and forth. Western Governors University, a great institution. Governor Levitt and I were the pushers behind that. And Levitt was interested in technology. I was interested in getting credit for performance in your testing. I'm a pilot, and it doesn't matter how long you sit in the seat. It depends whether you can fly the plane. And you've got to demonstrate that by performance. So it wasn't how long you sat in the seat, it's how much you could demonstrate you knew what you were supposed to know. And when we created that university, Levitt pushed technology, I pushed learning based on performance. And that institution has been monumentally successful. It is one of the largest online institutions in America and has one of the best reputations. But it has created a new base for making judgments about how you get certificates or degrees. You can do it based on performance, not just on seat time. I was very instrumental in getting that done. So that may be the more important contribution I made.
How would you want to be remembered?
Well, I'm always very critical of what I've done. I can always do it better. I want to be remembered as a guy who focused on important issues and tried hard to do something about them. Now, I always didn't succeed, but I think you ought to be counted by what are the issues you fight for and how well did you do your job in fighting for them. Whether you won or not is sometimes outside your control. As I ended governorship at age 70, I chose to go to run a school district in Los Angeles, the second largest in the nation, had 85,000 employees, had a budget larger than the state of Colorado, had more students than all the state of Colorado. That was a tough decision. It was the right decision, and I did good things in that job. I built 130 schools, $19 billion worth of new schools. But the more important thing was we really focused upon learning math and language arts, helping people to learn to read and to do basic math. And we raised the standards for that school, and we performed well on those standards. So that was a very important job. It was one where you don't get much praise. It's a tough job.
And you don't make a lot of money.
That's right, but it was 20 hours a day, and I did it for 6 years, and I enjoyed it.
That's fantastic, because so many more politicians today, right, cash out and self-interests override, and you've never given into that kind of beast, if you will.
Well, I don't like to self-compare myself with others. I just like to say, how do I feel about what I did? And I feel like I did the right thing by going to LA. And I've had a great life, and fortunately, I'm very healthy. I'm age 94 now, and my mind's still very active, and I'm still each day making judgments about, okay, what's my job? What am I to do? It's very interesting when you're 94 and you want to do something. You got to find a way to do it. You got to find a handle.
That's fantastic. You've done a great job. And again, it's keeping sharp and keeping active and having a purpose in life, I think.
Yeah.
The big driver.
But I want to comment about how this relates back to my early years in Holly. In the governor's office, at the end of the day, the question you want to ask is, what's the right thing to do? Did I do the right thing? That's the basic question. And small town, Western culture is a very good way to test whether or not you keep to that standard. Because in a small town, they will help you learn what it is to be a good human being. They will knock you over the head if they have to tell you to tell the truth. And I just value so well those early years because I'll tell you a quick story. My father ran an elevator in Holly. 13 miles away was a town named Hartman, Bristol. And they had another elevator there. And I ran that one. I was too young to drive, so my father would take me up there Monday morning, leave me, come pick me up on Friday night. I would run all during the week. I would weigh your grain over the scale. I would load it into the elevator. I'd take it out of the elevator and load it into a boxcar, all alone, totally alone. And then I would go down at the end of the day and buy Spam. And that was, for what I lived on. And I lived in the elevator itself at age 14. Now, that was very unusual activity, but I got to tell you, the responsibility you had was way beyond your years. Another job, during the war in high school, they had German prisoner camp in Colorado. And we were short of labor, so we harvested broom corn by hand. And they had a group of German prisoners who would come out to the field early in the morning to do that job. I was designated as the leader of that German prisoner gang. I'd have 12 of them. And I was in high school, not yet 16. And I would bring out every morning the knives, because you cut broom corn by hand, by knife, and put it on a trailer. I would hand out the knives to the German prisoners. At the end of the day, I would collect the knives back. But it was my job to manage that group of prisoners of war cutting broom corn. That's crazy when you think about it. Would you do that to a youngster who's not yet out of high school, put him in that position? And that's not, I was not that much different from anybody else in town. We all had to do different things during the war because there was nobody else around to do them.
Yeah, it was a different world at that time.
It was.
And some of that I really think is missing from today's world. I think the younger generation has it too easy and too many distractions.
Let me tell you another story. It's fun. I lived 10 miles from the Japanese relocation camp, Camp Hamachi. We went up and played football. And during the game, I was center, and Tots Randall was quarterback, and there were 10,000 people around. It was no stadium, just around a buffalo grass with white lines. And they got angry during the game because many of their young players were not in shape, and they kept carrying them off the field with cramps. So we in the huddle, instead of talking about, we got 3rd and 5, how do you make a first down? We'd talk about how do we get them down, get a fumble in their hands so they could win this game. We thought it was important for them to win that game. So they did win it. Just this year, I went down there with Senator Hickenlooper, and we were touring through that old museum. It's a small building, about twice the size of this room. And there were about 12 exhibits in there. 17 high school kids were taking us through, showing how proud they were of their exhibits. One of them was an exhibit of the football game. And there it was in a cage with a picture of the Japanese-American team and a picture of Holly. And so I was looking at that with these kids, and I said, yeah, that's me. And it was like a ghost from the past that walked out of their exhibit and was standing in their middle, because they didn't know that I was in that picture. And it was a real fun thing to do.
Absolutely. It's an opportunity, right? I mean, God-given opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So what advice would you give the younger leaders of, today to become the future leaders?
Tell the truth. It's a fundamental thing. If you're not telling the truth, you're in trouble. You got to start with telling the truth. Second, be bold, take a risk. Third, listen strongly to people who disagree with you, because there's some truth they may have that you need. And fourth, don't be the smartest guy in the room. Be the guy who's learning the most. That's the way you want to be as a leader. I'm learning the most because I need to learn. There's a lot of people in public and private life who have leadership positions who assume that they're the smartest guy in the room. And that's not a good posture, because it closes you off to new information. the humble. I am more humble about what knowledge I have at age 94 than I was at age 54. The longer I live, I've learned the world's more complex, more complicated, and the truth is scattered, and you got to really work at it.
Yeah. Is there any other thoughts you would like to share?
Say it again.
Any other thoughts you would like to share?
Well, the important thing in your vocation is pick work you like, pick people you like to work with, and do it with quality. Do it with a good job. Do the best you can. You may not be the fastest runner, but you can do what you can, and that's your role. Always be thinking about standing in the other guy's shoes. What does he feel, he or she? And that's very difficult to do in our polarized world. And I'm a guy who's had some pretty radical positions, cutting edge positions, but I believe the middle is a very necessary position to maintain. You can't have the edges driving public policy. You got to move the middle with you. In terms of public life, it's a great thing to do. Now, I had a lot of role in private life also, but that's not what we're talking about today. But I just think I'm a very curious person, and I'm very curious about anything I see. I want to learn about it. And it's been a fun life being that curious.
That's good. I appreciate all of the time that you've shared with me today and the memories that you've shared with me today. And thank you for all of the service that you have given this state and this country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I finish this conversation, I don't think I gave enough credit to my mother and father in terms of what they shared in life with me. And one last thing I'll add, my father at age 6 made me keep track of every cent I earned and every cent I spent. So I have an old book in which I kept track of everything I've earned and spent over a 10-year period when I was in the 30s. He was very patient with me. He was my banker. He'd sit down at the end of the year and calculate what interest I had from him because I was his banker. Oh, he owed me interest. That's very big attention. But my mother was the one who really gave me a very broader understanding of my ethical responsibility for other people. And she helped me understand what sharing was. She went out of her way to share. And those are the roots. You can pick it up from family, you can pick it up from friends, you can pick it up from fraternity brothers, but whoever helps you gain those perspectives are the real heroes of this world.